Welcome to Storytime Fun, boys and girls. We hope you enjoy. Today's story is out of the classic fairy tales from Hans Christian Andersen and the Brothers Grimm, as retold by Nicola Baxter. And today's story is called The Emperor's New Clothes. Some emperors like nothing better than to wage war on 3 nearby kingdoms before breakfast. Some love to build beautiful castles and palaces, each one bigger and better than the last. But the emperor in this story had a more unusual passion. He loved clothes. It was well known that the emperor spent most of the day trying on one costume after another to find which was most flattering to the rather generous royal figure. One day, there came to the court a pair of rascals intent on making a little money and living an easy life. They let it be known that they were weavers and not just ordinary ones. The cloth that we weave, they said, is so extraordinarily fine, and its pattern is so rare and intricate that only the most intelligent and refined people can see it. Before long, news of the 2 so-called weavers reached the ears of the emperor. "How very useful," he said to himself. "If I wore a suit of that cloth, I would be able to tell at once which of my ministers were too stupid and ill-bred for their jobs." So he summoned the weavers before him. When they arrived in the court, the 2 mischief makers bowed low. "What is your Imperial Highness's pleasure?" they asked. "I would like a suit made entirely of your famous cloth," declared the emperor, "and I would like it by the end of the week." "No problem at all," replied the weavers reassuringly. "Now, if we could just take a few measurements." My, your Highness has the figure of a man of 20? Next, the weavers ordered the bales of costly silk and gold thread to weave, they said, into their famous cloth. They had 2 enormous looms set up in a comfortable room. All day long they sat in front of the looms, pretending to weave. Of course, the looms were completely empty. The emperor was anxious to see how his suit was coming along, but although he knew that he was the cleverest man in the land, he was just a little worried that he might not be able to see the cloth. The emperor thought long and hard. In fact, surprisingly long and hard for the cleverest man in the land, until he had an idea. "Summon my chief minister," he cried. "He can report to me on the cloth the weavers are making for me." Well, the chief minister couldn't see the cloth either. But he was very worried that the emperor might dismiss him if he was one of those unfortunate people who were too stupid to see it. "It's absolutely perfect for your Highness," he reported. "I can honestly say that I have never seen anything to match it." Every day the weavers called for more silk and gold. They packed this away in their luggage, ready for a quick getaway. Soon the emperor became impatient again. He sent his chancellor to inspect the work. Once again, the poor man could see nothing at all, but he did not want to lose his job. "It is beyond compare," he declared. "Your Highness will be really delighted." At last, the emperor could bear it no longer. He hurried along to the room where the weavers were working and flung open the doors. The weavers, who had heard the swish of royal robes in the corridor, were very busy at their looms. Their hands darted backward and forward, holding absolutely nothing. The emperor stopped dead. It was his worst nightmare. Only he of all his court was too stupid to see the wonderful cloth. His throat felt dry and his voice quavered as he announced, "The chief minister and the chancellor were too faint in their praise. This cloth is truly too beautiful for words." At the end of the week, there was to be a grand procession. Naturally, it was expected that the emperor would wear clothes of the famous new cloth, of which the whole empire had heard. The weavers were busy night and day cutting thin air with huge pairs of scissors, and sewing with invisible thread, and pretending to sew buttons on and braid. When they were tired of this, they smiled at each other and said, "There, a costume fit for an emperor." On the morning of the grand procession, the emperor stood in his underwear while the weavers helped him on with his clothes. He agreed with everything they had to say about the cut and the cloth. By the time he had walked up and down a few times so that the weavers, as they said, could see how well the train draped, he had persuaded himself that he could almost see the costume, and that it was very fine indeed. So it was that the emperor walked proudly out at the head of his royal regiment, wearing only his second best pair of royal underwear. At first, there was a stunned silence from the crowd lining the streets, but everyone had heard that only clever people could see the clothes. So first one and then another spectator cried out, "Wonderful! Superb!" as the emperor passed. Before long, almost everyone was applauding and cheering. The emperor felt on top of the world. Now, it sometimes happens when everyone is making a lot of noise that there is suddenly a brief silence. And one of these silences happened just as the emperor reached the great square. In that moment of quiet, the voice of a little boy could be heard clearly all the way around the square. "But Mother," he cried, "the emperor isn't wearing any clothes." In that dreadful moment, the whole crowd realized that it was true, and they had been as silly as the emperor. One by one, the people began to laugh. The emperor struggled to remain dignified for a second. Then, scooping his imaginary train over one arm, he ran in the most unroyal way back to the palace. Oh! It is said that the emperor never was quite so vain about clothes after that, and perhaps he had the wicked weavers to thank for it. But those two rascals had become as invisible as the emperor's famous costume and were never seen again. Well, that's it for today. We'll see you next time.